Joining me now to provide more insight on President Xi's state visit is Yuval Weber. He's an expert on Russian and Eurasian affairs. I want to get your take looking ahead to this state visit. 70 years of diplomatic ties. What are the expectations for both these countries?
So the expectations are one, to say we've been friends for a long time, and now that we're getting closer, it's time to sort of rekindle that friendship. And also, this is part of a series of visits. A couple months ago, or maybe about 6 weeks ago, President Putin went to Beijing to attend China's big One Belt, One Road event. And President Xi will return the favor by going to St. Petersburg for the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which is Russia's big sort of business event. And so they also want to make sure that they more or less get their story straight ahead of the G20 summit that's coming up in a few months as well.
I want to ask you about all that FaceTime in just a second, but let's back up to this economic summit. What are you expecting to see here? China is Russia's largest trading partner.
So the Russians are very happy that between Russia and China, over the past year, they finally topped $100 billion of annual trade together. Now, that's about 2 months of US-China trade, so it's much smaller in terms of world trade. But what they're trying to do is really try to find something that is beneath the level of resource extraction. Russia can export all the timber, oil, gas, like things like that, but they want to find ways to get Chinese investment into their high-tech sectors. And that's what hasn't really followed on, and that's what the Russian economy actually needs from China. Not so much resource extraction, but investment at the small and medium-sized enterprises.
What do you make of the timing of this visit given the current US-China trade war? And as you mentioned, a lot of big international events coming up. You mentioned the G20, but they're also going to meet at the SCO Summit, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah, so the SCO Summit is their joint sort of anti-terrorism, anti-secession type organization. Russia has its own much more closely organized security organization with states like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and so forth. So ultimately, what the Russians are looking for is they want to say to the rest of the world that we and the Chinese actually have one big goal together. We have problems with sanctions, the Chinese have problems with trade, so therefore our strategic interests are allied at the top levels, which is basically let's resist US pressure, hegemony, and so forth. So that's essentially what they want to demonstrate, and particularly coming on the heels of President Trump's visit to the UK, they also want to engage in a bit of counter-programming to shift the narrative back towards them and away from the United States.
What about the other issues likely to come up during this visit? The DPRK, Iran, Venezuela. What do you think, where do you think they'll get on these topics? Are they also trying to get on the same page here, or are they already?
Ultimately, what we've seen for the past couple of years, even since Russia's entry or starting a war with Ukraine, like in eastern Ukraine, the annexation with Crimea and so forth, is that China supports Russia generally, but not specifically when it comes to these security issues. And so although China has said, we generally support the Russian position on this, that, and the other. So in Syria, they say we support stability. In Venezuela, they say we support the current regime to work with the opposition to find a peaceful solution. But they haven't really offered any specific assistance to the Russian diplomatic position on the things that Russia really cares about. And that's essentially where Putin has been unable to move Xi and unable to move the Chinese. He can get investment in, but that's good because China doesn't have many options. But when it comes to really changing China's foreign policy to bring it closer to the Russian position, the Chinese don't really have much of an interest to do so. And that's what Putin has been unable to do really for the past 5 years.
Yuval Weber, a lot to look forward to, a lot of ground to cover in the next day or so. Thank you so much for joining us.